Hi Lana, hello and welcome back to Lana's Coach. So we want to take a look at the concept of computer ethics, privacy and security. Now there are a lot of things that we need to really factor in when talk about this particular concept of computer ethics. First, we need to understand what is ethics, right? So ethics actually is the study of moral, it could be legal or social issues, even around you. There's a way that people expect you to behave, like what are kind of your moral behaviors, right? So are they good or bad? So when we talk about ethics here, you could actually be in a dilemma, like to do one thing might lead to another. It can cause a ripple effect within the society, especially when we talk about computers. There are those particular dimensions, like for example, when using social media, you could be making a lot of mistakes that prompt us to actually understand what computer ethics are. So ideally, when we talk about computer ethics, these involve to some extent everything around our lives, right? So we are often maybe placed in a situation where we have to use technology. We can't really do away with technology. But you realize that when you're using technology, there are things that you need to really understand. Because if you don't really use technology in a proper way, then you can cause more harm than good. So ideally, this particular issue of computer ethics is something that most people don't understand. And ideally, we need to consider what are the ripple effects of using computers into the society, what are some of the legal issues that we can actually understand when using computers, and so on. So when we talk about ethics, we have said that these are standards of moral conduct, right? The standards of right and wrong behavior. I've already explained that, right? So ideally, it boils down to our personality, personal integrity. When you're using computer, for example, when you are in a very closed door, no one is going to monitor you. So it's about your integrity of how you're going to maybe use the applications, use the hardwares, and so on. So it actually also creates trust and cooperation in relationships with others. When you, for example, you're using internet, for example, you realize that some behaviors might actually cause some negative impact to other users of the internet. So these are some of the things that we need to factor in. Again, we need to understand the ethical principles, right? So these are tools which are used to think through difficult situations. Like for example, an act is ethical if all of society benefits from that act. We normally say when you're using computers, for example, the advantage of using this computer should be more than the disadvantages that it causes, right? So an act is ethical if people are treated as the end and not as a means to an end. An act is ethical if it is fair to all parties that are involved. So those are the major ethical principles that should guide us when you're using the computers. Again, uh, these are morally acceptable behavior of using the computers. I've said that, right? So when you're using computer, you should ensure that whatever you do is actually to the good of the society, not to the bad. Like if you become a hacker, that means those are not acceptable behaviors, right? Although we have ethical hackers who are mandated to perform the right hacking tasks. But again, if you pirate someone's software, that means you're not using the computer for the right purpose, right? So we need to have the standard or guidelines that are going to ensure that we use technology in the better way. Now, it begs the question, do we have the right laws or legal measures that can help us maybe ensure that people use computers in the right way? So you need to ask yourself within your environment, your country, do you have the right maybe data protection laws and so on, right? So computer professionals are also needed here, yeah, and mostly people who are mandated to handle computers at a high level, like experts, right? They handle sensitive information, so they need to practice some kind of ethical behaviors. So we also need to know our customers, that they rely on our knowledge and expertise, so we need to be honest, right? We need to understand the products, the effect that they may have. Like if you are developing a software, right? Is it a software that is going to solve some issues, or it's going to create a lot of problems? We need to follow some good practices, like software development process. It needs to be a good one, right? We also need to maintain expected level of competencies when you're doing, when you're using these particular computers. Like you need to enroll for some courses so that you be abreast, or keep abreast of the technological advancements. And of course, you need to use your skills to actually be a good ambassador of how people should use computers, like the novice people, right? So yes, so we need to focus on this. Sorry, we need to focus on these four primary issues when you're talking about computer ethics. First is the privacy. Privacy is an act where unauthorized people should not be able to access data that are not meant for them, right? And of course, accuracy. Data, or rather information that is being provided, should be accurate all the time. So we talk about data being authentic, and it should be accurate at all levels. Like for example, if you have data within a database, it should be very, very accurate, so that when someone pulls data out of that particular database, it is very accurate. Property, we talk about intellectual property. These are the rights or to persons who actually invent or come up with some software or hardware. So we refer to those things as their property. And then access, also we need to have the responsibility to determine what kind of information a person has the right to obtain, right? Like when you again engage with a database, you need to understand what are the rights. Do we have the super admin rights, access levels, and so on? We don't expect an employee to have full rights to access data within a database. So we need to ensure that every person that is mandated to access the database has the right access rights. So an example, actually, I've already mentioned, is the problems with large databases. So here is where we store a lot of information, right? So we realize that within a particular organization, such as a hospital, they'll always collect and store a very sensitive and private data, like the health records of patients, right? So we need to ensure that we protect these particular large databases. And of course, we need to ensure that whatever data that is within this particular database are accurate, so that if we happen to migrate it to another platform, it should be consistent, right? We don't want a situation whereby data that was stored maybe 5 years ago, when we are retrieving it right now, it shows a different output altogether, right? So we need to ensure that these particular problems are eradicated within our databases. Again, we have problems with private networks, right? We are actually in a situation whereby people normally communicate with emails. You access your Wi-Fi's within the company. But do you know that these particular networks or other emails are being monitored by the employers? So again, we need to ensure that these particular networks are actually filtered, so that non-authorized users cannot be able to access these particular private networks. So when we ensure that our private networks remain private, as the name suggests, then we can actually be rest assured that when you communicate with our networks, we are secure, and no unauthorized people can be able to maybe steal our data or rather eavesdrop on our networks, and so on and so forth. Now, we also have the larger network, that is the internet. Here is where everyone gets to access the various resources. It could be videos, it could be the websites, and so on, name them. So we don't really need to ensure, we don't need to worry about communication within the internet. We need to ensure that a lot of procedures are put in place, like privacy of our data. We can always do some privacy settings, for example, within our web browsers, so that people cannot be able to access maybe our private data within our computer. When we talk about that, we need to ensure that we understand a particular small file known as the cookie, and this particular cookie can always record our data. So we need to ensure that our privacy, the policies that we put in place when accessing the internet, allows only the right cookies to be stored within our computers. Things such as spyware, we can always have anti-malwares to be able to block them so that they can't be able to install themselves within our computers. So ideally, talking about the internet, we have a lot of issues. So we need to really take note of how to protect ourselves from these particular problems. We have additional issues such as cyberbullying, or the use of inflammatory interchange of messages. We can also have people forwarding our emails, which we refer to as chain of mails. We can also have viruses. We can also have spam. Spam, these are kind of unwanted emails, right, that always get to your inbox. Now, talking about emails, also we need to consider the ethical principles of using emails, or normally refer to them as an etiquette. So what should you do when you're using or actually sending or receiving an email? Kindly do some prompt response to messages. This is ethical. There is no need of staying with an email for over a week, and maybe someone needs a quick response, right? Delete messages that are after you have read them, if you don't need them, so that you save your hard disk space, or rather the server space. Don't send messages you do not want others to read, right? The annoying messages, keep the messages short, precise, and clear, and to the point. Avoid typing messages or emails in capital letters. I've actually made there's a video I made, or a tutorial I made about ethical etiquettes about use of email. So you can always check on that. Don't type everything in capital. Be careful with sarcasm and humor in your message. Now, when you are talking to someone, it's different with how you can write an email. Even if it is your friend, always try to be formal when you're writing an email. Otherwise, someone might not understand the humor in a written email, right? So avoid them. Of course, we have the content and free speeches issues, right? This one can include hate speech, violence. So how do we protect ourselves from these speeches? Better still, how should we solve the problem of information that is not correct, right? Let's say, for example, you get access to a website and you get some information. How will you know that this particular information is correct, right? So we need to take some due diligence before we actually consume this particular information. Ensure that you check on the right author's website, or the organizations, or the logo of that particular organization's website, so that you don't get information from the wrong website, right? So that also happens to those people who are doing their coursework and research. Yeah, you need also to ensure that you use, like for example, you have Google Scholar, right? So when you're doing your research, you need to use Google Scholar, so that at least you get reliable information, right? So we also have information ownership issues, what I refer to as pirating of software, yeah, infringement of copyrights, plagiarism, right? These are some of the unethical behaviors that we need to really stay away from. Yeah? Before you pirate a program, or rather software, why can't you just maybe request the owner to give it to you, right? or purchase that particular software without really pirating it, and so on. So these are some of the issues. So we have various terms that you need to familiarize yourself with. Intellectual property. So these are creations. We talk about inventions by individuals that are protected by law. So if you happen to infringe into this particular intellectual property, then you should be arrested and arraigned in court. We also have trade secret. We have these particular logos and trademarks, for instance, right? So these are intellectual work or products belonging to a particular business or organization. We also have copyright. This is a right that protects the intellectual property so that others can't be able to use them without actually having the right, cannot be able to use them without permission. We also have patent. Patent rights are a bit stronger than copyright, right? So they grant the owner some exclusive right, or allows the owner to monopolize that particular software. So what we mean is that when you have a copyright on a particular software, it's always a good idea that you have patent, so that you have the whole exclusive rights to be able to own it, right? We have copyright laws. We have already looked at that. So we also have developers who normally develop this particular program, so they have their copyright. They have the copyright for these particular softwares. Of course, we also have the other party, the software buyers, who own the right to use the software according to the license agreements. You should not copy, resell any copyrighted software without the owner's permission. Then we have the 4 licenses that you need to be familiar with. Public domain. These ones are free to use softwares. Then we have freeware. Freeware are not really free for everyone. They're not free softwares, as we're going to see. They can be distributed as maybe some gift, right? Like for example, if for example you are affiliated to a particular product, they can give you a freeware software, right? Then you have shareware, which are normally limited in functionality. They are used for trial purposes. So someone can give you like an antivirus to use for 28 days. Then after 28 days, you are supposed to purchase the license. And of course, we have the all right reserved. Now this one, all rights belong to the owner. So you can't really have any attempt to use that particular software. So let's go through this very, very fast. I think I've already mentioned them. So the software here for the public domain has no owner and is not protected by any copyright. So you can pirate it. I mean, you can make many copies, right? You can sell it, and you can do all manner of things. Freeware I've already mentioned. Normally they can be used for maybe some demonstration purposes, right? They are not really being sold here, right? So you can use them for free, but they're not really free. By free, I mean you can't make copy and sell them. Then we have shareware, a license. These ones, as I mentioned, they can be used for trial purposes. So someone can give you for a period of time, and then after that you need to purchase. All rights, these ones you can't legally reuse whatsoever. So they belong to the user, right? Now, software piracy is not really a good ethical practice, so we need to avoid that. So this one involves illegal duplication, sale of copyrighted software, and so on. So these ones are not the right ethical principles, right? So we don't really advocate for software piracy. Of course, there are penalties if you're found pirating softwares according to the data laws or other software laws. You can always be jailed or given some fine. System quality also is very, very important. When you're using a system, it should actually adhere to some kind of standard. Like for example, a software should be free of bugs, right? We should design, develop our hardwares and software by following some procedures, like well laid out structures, so that we avoid the software flaws, design flaws, the hardware design flaws, and so on. So all these ones should be eradicated. So we can improve the software or the system quality by following the right software development procedures. We need to comment, we need to document everything that is actually happening within the system for proper maintenance and proper review of this particular system. Then also we can talk about ethical issues, right? When is software system or service ready for release? So we need also to ensure that we release the software free of bugs in the correct time. That is ethical. Then social issues, people should trust that particular software, right? When you have a software that has been released for use, then people have some doubt using it, then it creates some kind of social issues. And of course, political issues. Should Congress or industry develop standards of software? Politics should play a role in ensuring that all the software producers or the system producer purpose to follow the right standards when they're producing their system. Then we have computer crime. This is unethical, or it's not something that we really need to do. So we need to eradicate the use of crime when using computer. A good crime is when, for example, employees are not satisfied with maybe their pay. They can delete files and they can do a manner of things to these particular computers, right? So that is criminal. We can also have outside users who can actually use our resources, such as data portals without proper permissions. Hackers, these are unwanted people, right? They do use the computer for malicious reasons, right? So we also have organized crime, right? That are used for counterfeits, forgery, and so on. So all these are manner of crimes, computer crimes, which are not really the best computer ethics. Now we can also use viruses, worms to damage our computers. That is also a sort of a crime. Theft of hardware, software piracy, I've already seen that, right? Manipulation, yeah, violating. We talk about integrity issues within the system, right? So these are some of the computer crimes that you can also always talk about. Then we have computer security. We need to ensure that we protect our computer resources. For example, information, hardware, from unauthorized users who can damage them, from people who can sabotage, or natural disasters, right? So all these are a way of ensuring that we have proper computer security. Maybe we forgot to mention that we also need to have a good backup plan in case there's a natural disaster, for example. We need to ensure that we can always proceed with the normal operations. So what are the measures to protect computer security? So you have to have some restriction, right, or right access. Not everyone should be able to access the entire system. Implement a plan to prevent break-ins, right? We also need to change our passwords frequently. Don't just use one password for the entire year. Make backup copies, very, very important. Use antivirus softwares to eliminate those malwares. Do some encryption, especially when you are transferring data online, right? And then, of course, anticipate for any disaster. And this one, you need to have a very nice disaster recovery plan or procedure. You need to take note of the inventory that you have, right? And all ways that will enable you go back to business in case there is a disaster, right? And of course, employees are the key resource when you're using your computers. So employees should be trustworthy, right? And this one now boils down to how also you treat your employees. You don't expect your employees to be trustworthy and you don't really treat them well. So it is a back and forth, yeah, from the employer to employee, because the issue can be from the employer and really not from the employee, right? So you need to be competent if you are a computer professional. Yeah, you need to have some competency in handling computers, not only computers but also other users of computers. How do you become competent? Of course, you can enroll for these very many certifications, right, and trainings. You need to be responsible. Responsibility relies not only to the computer professionals but also to the users of the computer. For example, there are some kind of policies that should be followed. If you violate those particular policies, you should be responsible. If you pirate a software, you should be responsible, right? Integrity, everyone should be able to have some professional integrity. These are mannerism. Base your arguments or opinions on facts, right? And of course, be very neutral when you are executing some judgments so that we uphold computer ethics. So we have a body here, the ASM, Association for Computing Machinery, that provides some very nice laid out procedures of how we can conduct ourselves. So it contributes to society and human well-being. So avoid harms to others, be honest and trustworthy, take fair action, don't discriminate, give proper credit, respect other individuals, honor confidentiality. These are just guide, yeah, so that you can be able to practice the right ethics. Now, ideally, also we need to understand the ergonomics. Ergonomics are ideally the scientific principles of how humans interact with computers. So how do you sit, for example? How do you, the kind of mouse you're using, yeah? So it helps users or computer users to avoid physical and mental health risks, right? And to increase productivity. So we can avoid eye strain and headache when you take regular breaks, control ambient lights, avoid back and neck pain by having adjustable chairs or equipment, keep monitor at some level, right? So these are some of the ergonomic principles or computer ergonomic practices that you need to adhere to, right? Or we can still go ahead and check on the electromagnetic fields, right? You can avoid them by possible connection to miscarriages, right? Use caution if pregnant, avoid repetitive strain injury. These are injuries that can be found from repetitive work. We also have carpal tunnel syndrome, right? So these are damages in the hands and wrist. So what you are saying is that ergonomics are practices that are individual based. Don't wait for someone to tell you sit like this. Maybe switch on the lights, take frequent breaks. So it's up to you to adhere to these particular ergonomic principles or practices. So it's a personal or responsibility to conserve. How do you conserve? Maybe conserve the energy of the computer by turning on the screensavers, turn computers off at the end of the workday, don't leave them on. Recycle, right? Or like papers we use, dispose old parts via recycling. If you can't recycle, if you can't reuse, recycle, right? And of course, educate, ensure that people understand the facts about ecological issues. So ideally, those are the key computer ethics or introduction to the concept of computer ethics. So there are a number of things that you have highlighted. So we need to look at the various principles of computer ethics, that you need not to do harm or use computers to do harm to others. You need to practice the right ethical principles by observing the intellectual property rights. You need also to understand the terms such as the trade secrets and so on. And of course, we need also to look at our responsibility as the computer's users. Where does my right end and where does the right of the other computer user start? So should you find this particular information useful, kindly take a second or two to subscribe to our channel.